I still remember the exact moment my own parents stood up in front of our entire church and disowned me like I was some kind of disgrace, all because I married a widower with a little girl they refused to accept. And the worst part wasn't just the humiliation, it was the way everyone sat there watching, whispering, judging, like I deserved it, like I had done something wrong by choosing love over their approval. And I could feel my husband's hand tighten around mine as his daughter clung to his leg, confused and scared, while my mother's voice echoed through the room calling my marriage a mistake, and my father said I had shamed the family beyond repair. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every second of their cruel little speech was being recorded, and not just by one person. And as I stood there, heart pounding, holding back tears, I made a silent promise to myself that if they wanted to make me the villain in front of everyone, then I would let the whole world see exactly who they really were. Because within hours, everything they built their reputation on would start collapsing in a way they never saw coming. My name is Emily. I'm 28, married to a man who had already lived through more loss than most people our age ever should. And before all of this happened, I actually believed my family loved me unconditionally, like the kind of love that didn't come with rules or ultimatums. But that illusion shattered the moment I told them I was dating Daniel, a widower with a 5-year-old daughter named Lily. Because instead of asking about him or getting to know the little girl who would eventually call me mom, they immediately started questioning my judgment, my morals, even my future, as if I was throwing my life away on someone damaged. And I tried to be patient, I really did, telling myself they just needed time, that once they met Daniel and saw how kind he was, how gentle he was with Lily, they would come around. But they never did, and things only got worse when we decided to get married anyway, because to them, it wasn't just a bad decision, it was a betrayal. And what I didn't realize back then was just how far they were willing to go to make me regret choosing my own happiness over their control. The first time my parents met Daniel, I knew things weren't going to go the way I had hoped, because my mom didn't even try to hide the way her smile dropped the second she realized he wasn't just some guy, but a man who had already been married before. And my dad shook his hand like it physically hurt him, barely making eye contact. And Lily, sweet little Lily, stood quietly beside Daniel, holding her stuffed bunny, looking up at me like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to be there. And that alone broke something inside me, because no child should ever feel like they're not wanted, especially not by the people who are supposed to become her family. But instead of welcoming her, my mother leaned down with that fake, sugary voice and asked, "So, where's your real mom?" And I swear I felt the air leave the room as Daniel's face went completely still, because his wife, Lily's mother, had died just 2 years earlier after a long illness, something I had already told my parents, something they clearly didn't care enough to remember, and I quickly stepped in, trying to smooth things over, but the damage was already done, because Lily pressed herself closer to Daniel's leg and wouldn't let go for the rest of the visit. And from that moment on, every interaction just kept getting worse. My parents constantly making little comments disguised as concern, asking me if I was sure I wanted to raise another woman's child, reminding me that I was still young and could start fresh with someone who didn't come with baggage. And every time they said things like that, I felt my chest tighten, because to me, Lily wasn't baggage. She was a little girl who had lost her mother and deserved love. And Daniel wasn't damaged. He was strong in a way most people could never understand. But no matter how many times I tried to explain that to them, they refused to listen. And things hit a breaking point the night I told them we were engaged, because instead of being happy or even pretending to be supportive, my dad just stared at me across the dinner table and said, "If you go through with this, don't expect us to stand by and watch you ruin your life." And my mom didn't say a word. She just nodded in agreement like it was already decided. And I remember sitting there in complete silence, realizing for the first time that their love actually did come with conditions, and I had just crossed the line. But even then, I still held on to this tiny bit of hope that they would come around before the wedding, that maybe once they saw how serious I was, how happy I was, they would choose me over their pride. So I kept trying, inviting them to dinners, to small family outings, even asking if they wanted to spend time with Lily, but they always had an excuse, always something more important to do. And eventually, the invitations stopped. Not because I didn't want them there, but because I was tired of watching the people I loved the most treat the people I loved now like they didn't matter. And when Daniel and I finally set a wedding date, I made one last attempt to include them, sitting them down and telling them how much it would mean to me to have them there, how I didn't want to start this new chapter of my life without them. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something soften in my mom's expression, but then my dad spoke, his voice calm but cold, and he said, "We'll come, but don't expect our blessing." And I should have realized right then that their presence wasn't going to be about support, it was going to be about control, about making a statement. I just didn't know yet how far they were willing to take it. The weeks leading up to the wedding should have been some of the happiest of my life, but instead, they felt like walking through a storm I couldn't escape, because my parents didn't just keep their distance, they started quietly turning people against me, calling relatives, talking to members of our church, framing my decision like I was making some reckless, sinful mistake. And at first, I didn't even realize what was happening until little comments started reaching me from people who had always been kind before, asking if I was sure this was what God wanted, or telling me they were praying for me to come to my senses. And every time I heard something like that, I felt this mix of anger and disbelief, because it wasn't coming from nowhere, it was coming from my own family. And when I confronted my mom about it, she didn't even deny it. She just said, "We're trying to save you before it's too late," like I was the one who needed rescuing. And that's when I started to understand that this wasn't just disapproval anymore, it was a full-on campaign to control the narrative of my life. And still, despite everything, I didn't uninvite them from the wedding, because a part of me was still that little girl who wanted her parents to be proud of her, who wanted them sitting in the front row smiling as I walked down the aisle. And Daniel saw that conflict in me, even when I tried to hide it. He'd hold my hand and tell me gently, "We don't need their approval to be happy." But I could also see the way this was affecting him, the way he became more guarded every time my parents' names came up, the way he hesitated before asking if they had said anything new, because he didn't want to hurt me, but he also didn't want Lily exposed to people who clearly didn't accept her. And that was the hardest part, knowing that my choice to keep trying with my parents was also putting them in a position where they felt unwelcome. And the night before the wedding, everything came to a head when my dad called me and asked if I would meet him alone. And against my better judgment, I agreed, hoping maybe, just maybe, this was the moment he would finally change his mind. But instead, he sat across from me and said something I will never forget. He told me that if I went through with the wedding, I would no longer be considered his daughter, that I was choosing a broken man and his past over my own family. And for a second, I couldn't even breathe because it felt like an ultimatum I never thought they would actually give. And when I asked him if he really meant that, if he was really willing to lose me over this, he didn't hesitate. He just said, yes. And I remember sitting there, staring at him, realizing that the man who raised me was willing to walk away from me simply because I refused to live my life the way he wanted. And something inside me finally shifted, something quiet but permanent. Because in that moment, I understood that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for them unless I became someone I wasn't. And when I walked out of that conversation, I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't begging for their approval. I was just done trying to earn a love that should have been unconditional from the start. But what I didn't realize was that they weren't done trying to control the situation, not even close. And the next day, at the wedding, they were about to make sure everyone knew exactly how they felt. The ceremony had already started when I realized something felt off, because instead of the warm, supportive atmosphere I had imagined, there was this quiet tension hanging in the air, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. And as I stood at the back of the church holding my bouquet, I could see people whispering, glancing toward the front row where my parents were sitting stiffly, not smiling, not even looking at me. And for a brief second, doubt tried to creep in. But then I looked at Daniel, standing at the altar, his eyes soft, steady, full of love, and Lily beside him in her little dress, clutching her flowers and scanning the room until she found me. And the moment she smiled, everything else faded, because that was my family now. That was what mattered. So I took a deep breath and started walking down the aisle, telling myself that no matter what happened, I was making the right choice. And for a while, everything went exactly as it should. The vows, the quiet laughter, the way Daniel's voice cracked when he promised to love me, and the way I knelt down to promise Lily that I would always be there for her too. And there wasn't a dry eye in the room, not even mine. But just as the officiant was about to pronounce us husband and wife, my father suddenly stood up. And at first I thought maybe, just maybe, he had changed his mind, that he was about to say something kind, something supportive. But instead, his voice cut through the room, loud and cold, as he said, "I can't sit here and pretend this is right." And everything froze. Every head turning toward him as he continued, talking about how this marriage was built on poor decisions, how I was throwing my future away, how our family refused to support something that went against everything they believed in. And I felt my entire body go numb as he spoke, because this wasn't just disapproval anymore. This was humiliation, deliberate and public. And then my mother stood up too, backing him up, saying that they had tried to talk sense into me, but I refused to listen, that they couldn't stay silent while I made the biggest mistake of my life. And I could hear people murmuring, shifting uncomfortably, some looking at me with pity, others with judgment. And for a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't speak, because I couldn't believe my own parents were doing this to me here on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. But then I felt Daniel's hand in mine, steady and warm, and I saw the way Lily was looking up at me, confused and scared, and that snapped something back into place, because I realized that if I let this moment define me, if I let their words take over, then they would win. So instead of breaking down, instead of running away, I turned to face them, my heart pounding, but my voice steady, and I said, "If you can't support me, then you don't have to stay." And the silence that followed was almost deafening, because no one expected me to say that, not even them. And for a second, I saw something flicker in my father's eyes. Shock? Maybe even doubt? But it was gone just as quickly as it appeared, replaced by anger. And without another word, they turned and walked out, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and a moment that should have been ruined. But somehow, standing there with Daniel and Lily, I realized it wasn't ruined at all, because for the first time I had chosen myself without hesitation. And what I didn't know yet was that someone in that room had captured everything that just happened, and within hours it would spread far beyond those walls in a way my parents could never control. After my parents walked out, there was this heavy silence for a few seconds that felt like it might swallow the entire room. But then something unexpected happened. Our officiant cleared his throat, smiled gently, and said, "Love doesn't ask for permission." And just like that, the tension cracked. People started clapping, some even stood up, and suddenly the moment that was supposed to destroy our wedding turned into something stronger, something defiant. And Daniel squeezed my hand like he was silently telling me we had already won. So we finished the ceremony, we said, "I do," and when he kissed me, it felt like everything we had just gone through only made that moment more real, more earned. And for the rest of the night, we tried to focus on the joy, on the people who chose to stay and support us. But even then, I could feel the weight of what had happened lingering in the background, like a storm that hadn't fully passed yet. And I didn't realize just how far it was about to reach until the next morning when my phone started exploding with notifications, messages, tags, missed calls from numbers I didn't even recognize. And at first, I thought something was wrong, but then I opened one of the messages and saw a link. And the moment I clicked on it, my stomach dropped, because it was a video of my wedding, specifically the exact moment my parents stood up and publicly disowned me. And the angle made it clear it wasn't just some random recording. It was clear, steady, intentional. And judging by the thousands of views already climbing by the second, it had been posted hours ago. And as I kept scrolling, I realized it wasn't just one video. Multiple people had uploaded clips, different angles, different captions, but all telling the same story. And the comments? The comments were nothing like my parents probably expected, because instead of people agreeing with them, instead of supporting their so-called values, they were being torn apart. Strangers calling out their cruelty, defending me, praising Daniel, even pointing out how heartless it was to treat a child like Lily as if she didn't belong. And I just sat there, staring at my phone, trying to process how something so painful had suddenly turned into something powerful. And then my phone rang, and when I saw my mom's name flashing on the screen, I already knew why she was calling. But I answered anyway, and the second I did, she didn't even say hello. She just said, "You need to take that video down right now." Her voice sharp, panicked, nothing like the confident tone she had used in the church. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel intimidated. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt calm. Because now the world had seen exactly who they were, and there was no taking that back. I let her panic spill through the phone for a few seconds before I finally spoke, and when I did, my voice was steady in a way it had never been with her before, because for the first time, I wasn't asking for approval, I was setting a boundary. And I told her I didn't post the video, I didn't ask anyone to record it, but I also wasn't going to clean up a mess they created themselves. And the silence on the other end said everything, because deep down, she knew I was right. And over the next few days, the video kept spreading. Their names, their reputations, everything they had tried to protect started unraveling as more people spoke out. And suddenly, the same people who once whispered about me were reaching out with support. But by then, it didn't matter anymore, because I wasn't living for their approval. I was building a life with a man who loved me and a little girl who chose me, and that was worth more than anything I lost. And if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that sometimes karma doesn't need your help. It just needs the truth. So if you've ever been made to feel like choosing your own happiness was wrong, remember this. The people who try to shame you the loudest are often the ones with the most to hide. And trust me, eventually, it shows.